So if you're kind of clueless as to what it is you saw in the opening shots, here's a big hint. It's an air conditioner with a heater core in it for one of these GTVs. When you think about it, these customers spend an awful lot of money resurrecting effectively abandoned piles of rust and making them beautiful street cars. Some of these cars go home to places like California where it gets incredibly hot in the summertime and a little less enjoyable to drive. So we're putting air conditioning with an incorporated heater core in one of these cars. Now, before you stick your nose up in the air and get all bent out of shape about having air conditioning in an Alfa Romeo, let's explain a few things. One, the compressors that drive the air conditioning system are much smaller, a whole lot less horsepower consuming, and far less conspicuous when done right. So you can still have that vintage look and feel of your car, and yet have a comfortable car to drive in the summertime. Also, by the fact that they don't use as much horsepower anymore to drive that compressor, it makes it certainly a far more desirable option to have. You can go through all sorts of places online and get the equipment, and you can do most of the work yourself probably, but effectively at the end, a licensed refrigeration handling person is going to have to create a vacuum and then add the refrigerant to your car. So other than that final step, most of the stuff, those of you that are a little more mechanical equipped, could probably handle installing this yourself. I'm excited about doing this. I think this is a great idea. And if this works out the way I expect it to, because this is a very well-designed system, it's very compact, it's very discreet. When you put it away, you shouldn't be able to notice anything involved. So if this works out as I expect it to, I'm most likely going to end up putting this in a couple of my cars. Though up here in Washington State, you don't need air conditioning but maybe a few days out of the year. But those are ideally the best days that you're out there driving. Why not be a little more comfortable? I certainly see it in my Super and possibly one of my GTs. Anyway, so in preceding videos, you'll see us putting this together. Stay tuned. I think this is going to be very exciting. I think this is going to be something a lot of people will want. And I think this is something that, if you have the means, you should probably consider doing it. There's no reason for you to be in a hot car on a hot day. Okay, this is my Super project. Sooner or later, I'm going to make this the most insane little Super, at least in Washington anyway. So, what we got going on is this car hasn't been on the road since 2005. Okay, so we're talking about cresting 8 years at this point. But it was running NGK R's, BPR6ES's. Not terribly hot plug, but still a good little street plug. Okay, so you look at this plug, it's the same as the Golden Loge. Here's the NGK. They're both very sooty, very foul, okay? That is just a characteristic that you're going to find on carbureted cars if they're not burning efficiently. Okay, so we're not going to get into the diagnostics of carbs right now. That's not where this is going. What I'm merely doing is I'm just showing you that the quality of the plug is relevant to its firing capabilities. Whether a hot firing or a cool firing plug is ideal for you, that's between you and your mechanic. But we're going to save these plugs. We're going to make these plugs good again, just with this little bit of work. Now, the tool that I'm showing you hasn't been produced in 50 years. This is a very old tool, but it still works great, okay? But there is a small handheld version of this you can buy at any cheap tool store, and you should consider buying it. Now, the disclosure. If you're going to use one of those handheld spark plug cleaner jobbies, what that does is it blasts a form of media onto the surface of the plug. You have to make sure you get every bit of that media out of there before you reinstall the plug, okay? Because what you're going to do is you're going to put little sand deposits or whatever your media is in the motor. Nobody wants that. It's not a good idea. So I'm going to show you how this thing works. I'm going to show you how good plugs can be, and we'll take it from there. So I'm going to start with the NGK. Okay, now the NGK, because it's a point or a gap style plug, there is an extra step you have to do. Whereas on the Golden Loge, those are 4-point non-gapable plugs. Okay, so that part is omitted from the first. So, starting with my NGK, I pull this trigger, and what it's going to do, there's a blasting media, if you will, inside there. It's going to just clear the surface. I'm rotating the plug to make sure it blasts all the way down. Okay, now my plug is clean. So I'll put it back in there because this has a reverse blast where it just blows air instead. Now my plug has no debris in it. Now I'm going to install it into the firing window. Okay, this has a dial indicator to adjust the gap. I know that my gap is 0.25 gap, so that's set. So now, what I'm going to do, where I put the plug in, there's an inspection window on the bottom side. Now I can inspect the fire. I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, now that plug's cleaned up, that wasn't a bad firing. It was uniform, it was all solid blue, a little bit random around the actual point, but nonetheless it was a good, clean, burning plug. And now, that plug's ready to go back into service. It's just that simple. But now we're going to use this Golden Loge. Now again, that's one sooty plug. Same thing, blast with the abrasives. Pretty clean. Now we clean it. And that plug's ready for service again. Now, I'm going to install this. Now the thing about a nice 4-point plug like this is the firing is saturated, which means it's getting a complete ignition, complete burn. Okay, and that's a nice thing about a plug like this. Okay. Okay. Now that Golden Loge plug, turn off the air here. That Golden Loge plug came out of a car that hasn't ran since the late 70s. You saw how clean for the ignition it had. You also saw how saturated that spark was. How saturated that spark was versus this one. Both of them are clean, both of them are very serviceable now. There's no reason why I couldn't put both these back into work. Will I? Probably not. But the thing with it is it's just a simple maintenance thing. If the point and the electrode are clean, if they're not burned away, you can use these until the cows come home. Okay? Just food for thought. I just wanted you to see, you know, how misreading a plug can be. So let's quit giving the Golden Loge bad name, and let's quit ranking the NGKs as a God's gift to the engine. There's many different kind of plugs out there that can do all sorts of the same task, and yeah, it's trial and error, but effectively, there you go. So I kind of wanted to stop and bring up the subject. Plugs are a preference. The NGK is probably the most common plug that Alfa guys use, at least here in the States. What other people use, I don't know, but here's what I like. I prefer sometimes the Bosch Platinums. I really do like the Golden Loge, or Lodge, however you want to say it. I keep them in stock. They seem to have always worked well for me, but they do seem to foul fairly easy. That is a drawback, but if they're fouling, it's not the plug's fault. It's always somebody else's fault. Mr. Carburetor, Mr. Ignition, it's always something else's issue. The plug just does one job and it just ignites. Okay? So how can we hold the plug accountable for that? If it fouls easy, you're ignoring the real problem. It's not the plug.